I am thrilled, excited, can't wait to talk about my thoughts and predictions on Bridgerton Season 3 Part 2. I loved Part 1 and I thought it was a great setup for Part 2. There's so many different storylines and plots to finish, to tie together, to conclude at the end of Season 3, and I think that there's so much that's going to happen and so much drama and romance. I'm so excited to see what happens, but I have a lot of ideas on what I think could happen. So I want to talk through those and share those with you today. And as always, if you agree or disagree or have different thoughts or opinions and predictions, definitely comment those below. I'd love to discuss and want to know what you're all thinking too. So first I'll start with the big Colin and Penelope things that I think are going to happen. I think there are a couple big plot lines that I think that we're going to see tie up or further along in Part 2, and I think those are: one, Colin and Penelope's romance. They, in theory, get engaged at the end of episode 4 after Colin essentially proposes to Penelope. It's not official yet, but I think that's clearly where that is headed. So I think we'll see a lot about wedding planning, engagement, and all that. In the book, they do have an engagement ball and a lot of building up to their wedding, which is actually really exciting because we haven't had as much of that in Bridgerton. We had a little bit with Simon and Daphne in Season 1, but in Season 2 it ends with Anthony and Kate getting engaged and declaring their love for each other and wanting to reach that step, but we don't really get an engagement or wedding from them. So I am really excited that we get that with Colin and Penelope this season. But I think obviously a big obstacle that is going to come with that is that Penelope is Lady Whistledown and Eloise knows that, and she's very concerned about Penelope marrying Colin, that when he doesn't know that she's Lady Whistledown. And I think that's one of the biggest changes from the book, is that Colin knows Penelope's Lady Whistledown before he proposes to her, before the carriage scene. So that is a huge change, and I'm really interested to see how that goes. I do think it will end with them getting married at the end of Season 3, but I'm very intrigued to see how that plays out. I imagine Colin's going to find out by the end of episode 5, maybe 6, but I think 5. So, and then 6 will maybe be his initial reaction, 7 kind of coming to terms with that, and 8 maybe telling the rest of the ton, or at least maybe some other members of the Bridgerton family, if not the ton. That's kind of the timeline I'm playing with in my head right now, but I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. I think in the teaser, Eloise threatens to tell Colin herself that Penelope is Lady Whistledown, but I think it will end up playing out that Penelope does tell Colin. I think she will tell him, but I think she's clearly going to be pushed into doing so by Eloise. And I also hope by the end of the season 2, if Colin is able to come to terms with Penelope being Lady Whistledown, that it kind of helps Eloise and Penelope mend their friendship and Eloise come to terms with it a little bit. I think we've kind of seen them come a little bit back together. Eloise has extended a little bit of warmth towards Penelope as the season has progressed. I just miss them so much, and I really want them back, especially as we get closer to Eloise's season. I would just really love to get Penelope's back. I think another plot that could really tie into Penelope and Colin's story is the Featherington family needing a male heir. That's also very different from the books, and I've seen a lot of talk and a lot of people speculating on the interesting timing of that plot line. And is it just a comedic storyline and something for the Featheringtons to do and Penelope's sisters? Or is that kind of a hint at something to come with Colin and Penelope and maybe an impending pregnancy sooner than we would maybe think? So I'm kind of playing with that as well and thinking if that's going to come into play, because they have made a big deal of that and tied that throughout the first 4 episodes, which is very interesting. I do think it's going to end up being Colin and Penelope. I think that would be a great way to keep Colin and Penelope and Luke and Nicola in the Bridgerton universe and keeping them relevant to the stories. Obviously, Penelope is Lady Whistledown, but I think also increasing their roles within the Featherington family. I think that will be really important to them in future seasons. Other storylines and predictions that I have, especially tying to Penelope and Colin and Eloise, is the whole Cressida situation. So spoilers for the books and for potentially the show. If you don't know, Cressida is kind of who forces Penelope and Colin's hand to reveal to the ton that Penelope is Lady Whistledown. Cressida finds out and blackmails Penelope, and then Penelope ends up just revealing her, and well, I guess Colin ends up revealing the secret to the ton that she is Lady Whistledown. So it will be interesting to see if that's what they decide to do here. I did notice in part 1 that Eloise has kind of said maybe a little bit too much to Cressida about Penelope, about, oh, don't be fooled by Penelope, she knows more than she's letting on, and some of these other things that I think could key in Cressida to learning and figuring out that Penelope is Lady Whistledown. And perhaps she does blackmail Penelope with that information, or they could just go the route of Eloise is put Penelope on a timeline to tell Colin, and so with that, will that lead to other people finding out, and perhaps the whole town finding out as well. Because I also find it very interesting, they've given Cressida more humanity in the show than they have in the book, with her dad being very overbearing and pressuring her to find a husband, and her being kind of lonely. She's a very cold person, but she's also would like to have friends and all that as well. So I'm very interested to see if they go the blackmail route with Cressida, or if they give her more of a softer conflict with Penelope. We shall see. A non-Colin and Penelope storyline that I've really loved is just Francesca and Francesca's debut and being on the Marriage Mart and her falling in love with John. I'm very interested to see that play out. I anticipate that it will end with an engagement or wedding. I don't know if we'll see it, but wedding at the end of the season to kind of start to go and lead towards Francesca's main storyline. I do hope that we get to see her a little bit more, and her and John. I imagine that in order to get the ultimate impact of Francesca's romance in her book and her plot, they're going to make us fall in love with John and Francesca. I think they really want that to have the overall impact. They want us to see them, they want us to love them, they want us to really like their romance. I think my biggest prediction going into part 2 is I think that Benedict is going to be the main character, the romance for season 4, and I think that we're going to meet Sophie by the end of the season. I think my prediction is that perhaps at Colin and Penelope's engagement ball, perhaps Sophie will be there, and that's where they'll meet, or another ball this season, but I really think that we will be meeting Sophie. They really haven't touched on Eloise and her romantic endeavors at all this season, so I don't think it's going to be her next season, and I think they're going to give us a season of Francesca and John together before we get to Francesca's story as well. So that's what's leading me to think that it's going to be Benedict. I think it's also about time. He really hasn't had a lot to do in these 3 seasons. They've given him little storylines of like finding his purpose and little romantic storylines here and there, but not a whole lot. So I think it's time, and it will obviously, his main romance and his storyline of being the main character will give him something to do. I don't have any other big predictions outside of that. Yeah, so those are some of my initial thoughts and predictions for part 2 of season 3. I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to June 13th. Please comment below or reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, @LeonzaReadsTV, and let me know what your thoughts and predictions are. If they're the same, if they're different. I love to know what you're all thinking, and I'm just so excited. I think part 1 was a great build up to part 2, and I think part 2 is just going to blow part 1 out of the water too. I think it's just the drama and the romance is just gonna be peak, and I can't wait. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll definitely have more Bridgerton content on my channel once part 2 comes out, so stay tuned for that. Bye!